Hey everyone, if we haven't met before, I'm Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach and developmental editor, and I'm host of Self-Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for writers who have finished or almost finished writing their book and are ready to learn the art of self-editing. Today's video, while it is especially for memoir writers, it has something of use for all kinds of writers because every book needs smooth transitions in it. So even if you're not a memoir writer, tune in because I do think it'll have lots of information that's of use to you as well. So mastering transitions in memoir writing can be tricky. We often find ourselves wondering, how do I move gracefully from one scene to the next and still keep readers oriented and engaged in what's happening? This is a question that the memoir writers I coach ask me all the time. So I thought this week would be a great time to tackle this question. A transition in writing refers to the the words we use between a scene to shift gears from one scene to the next. It's the way an author helps readers move smoothly from an idea, a scene, or just a specific section of a story. And transitions matter. You may not notice them when you're reading, but you notice them if they're not there. That's because a good transition creates flow. It eliminates any kind of feeling of like a choppy jump from one idea to another. It prevents your reader from feeling jarred when you switch ideas or have new characters enter the scene. A transition helps readers understand connections between different events as they occur. It really helps your reader connect the dots. And a good transition can keep your narrative engaging and clear. It organizes your ideas if it's done well. If you are on your first draft, it is helpful to know what a transition is. It may be helpful for you to understanding the structure of your story by crafting those transitions in your first draft, but it's absolutely not something to get too worried about. Many changes are going to occur between this draft and your next draft. And so you may not even be keeping all of the scenes in your story. For that reason, worrying too much about a transition could needlessly slow you down. So don't worry too much about it, but it is helpful to understand the principle. There are a lot of different techniques that you can use to help a reader shift from scene to scene. What I have kind of a list of the most common ones that you'll see on this slide here. Chronological markers. They're exactly what they sound like. It might be a week later, a year before, last Christmas. These are just phrases that signal a time shift or signal to you, the reader, um, when the event took place that you're about to write about. Place shifts are another way to introduce a new scene, to move your character somewhere different. So an example here is back in grandmother's kitchen, right? So this signals we are no longer in the place we just were. We are going back in time and we're thinking about grandma's kitchen. And we can also use thematic questions. But what did survival mean, really? This is something that we can use to reflect on a scene that just happened and think about how the realizations, the new understanding that you have because of this moment that's just unraveled, how it speaks to the themes that your writing is addressing. Now, I want to be really clear. These examples are real clunkers. They are not artful. They sort of hit the reader over the head with information. And we want to strive not to do that. We want to have artful, smooth transition words that your reader may not even notice is happening. They just know that they're comfortable and they're on a smooth ride. I used these just because they're very obvious, and so they're very clear signals so that you can understand the concept at play. But one of the tricks to a smooth transition is that your reader doesn't even really notice they're there. They just know that they are comfortable in your story and that they are not being jarred or surprised by sudden shifts. Now I would like to look at a couple of examples that illustrate well the kinds of techniques we're talking about. The first comes from Mary Laura Philpott's collection of essays that she's woven into a memoir called Bomb Shelter. And in her book, we've got a great example of a chronological marker. At a professional reception a few years ago, a person with whom I had enough in common to be at the same event, but whom I didn't really know, looked my outfit up and down and said, "Well, aren't you cute?" So, as you can see, there's a lot more going on in this chronological marker than simply saying last Thursday, right? We've got lots of information here. So, let's unpack what's going on. The sentence drops us into a very specific moment, and that's why we call this a chronological marker. We know that this takes place a few years ago, and we know where it took place in a professional setting. And that's very important because it drives the point home that she's ultimately going to make in this particular essay. So this is the first piece of transition, and it signals a shift to this new idea we're about to explore. Next, this narrator frames the social context. She's showing us that there is another person in this scene. It's an acquaintance, but not a close friend. And this little bit of background is important context that prepares us for this exchange so that this person doesn't just suddenly appear from nowhere, right? We're getting, there's a setup here that we are being prepared for their entry. Finally, the quote, "Well, aren't you cute?" acts as an emotional pivot. We sort of go, uh-oh. This signals that we are entering a new kind of interaction, maybe different than whatever it is that preceded this particular passage. And it's an emotional pivot that tunes us. It's kind of an alarm that we are about to consider issues perhaps pertaining to gender dynamics or professionalism or workplace harassment, who knows? But we know that the tone has just shifted because of this kind of inappropriate comment. So there is a lot happening, and all of this is setting us up to transition into a new scene. Now we have an example from a very powerful memoir called The Sound of Gravel. And this is an example of a place shift. We are going to move along with the author of this memoir to a new place. We are moving into her classroom. The classroom smelled like Pine Sol and had 20 wooden desks in lines on a cement floor that looked brand new, smooth and shiny, like the film over mom's glossy photographs. This line transitions you into a new setting by anchoring you as the reader in all of these really unique sensory details, unique but familiar sensory details. That smell of Pine Sol, right? So many of us remember that growing up. Gross, but we can remember that, right? And we have this visual of the wooden desks and the cement floor. All of these kinds of details just instantly transport us into this classroom. We can see it so clearly. And because of the time she takes to really establish where it is we're going, this transition doesn't feel abrupt. She's taking us by the hand and walking us into the classroom step by step until we are really in it and we are ready for this new scene. Along with the kinds of techniques we've just talked about, we can also think of reflection as a bridge that helps us transition to the next scene. Memoir isn't just about events, it's about the meaning that we infer from the events as they've unraveled, right? So that's really what we're showing up for. We want to know, what did this memoirist glean? How are they different? What kind of epiphany did they have as a consequence of the events that they have just shown us? So, reflection serves as a bridge between different moments in your memoir, and it helps your reader understand not just what happened, but why it matters. A single reflective line can really help your reader transition to the next scene because what it does is it connects the dots. It shows why you've just shared the scene that you have and how it's going to connect to the next scene and how ultimately it's going to move you toward the subject of your memoir to a new level of understanding. So again, these are clunky examples here, but they give you an idea. I didn't realize it then, but that pattern started long before. Years later, I would recognize the same feeling. So these are little interjections between scenes that just mark why they're important, why they stuck with the writer, and why she's including them in the narrative. So in this next example, we're going to look at a passage from Educated by Tara Westover. And this passage is just a perfect example of a reflective transition. The decisions I made after that moment were not the ones she would have made. They were the choices of a changed person, a new self. You could call this selfhood many things: transformation, metamorphosis, falsity, betrayal. I call it an education. Wow. So this passage explicitly highlights transition. We see exactly where that author was and where she winds up because of the events she has just described. So the best advice I can offer is read. Read memoirs. Notice how your favorite memoirists guide you from one scene in their story to the next. You'll notice they rarely use stiff mechanical phrases. Instead, their transitions are smooth. You hardly notice them unless you're really looking for them. So if you're able, I recommend getting yourself a hard copy of your book, preferably one that you don't mind marking up, because annotating your book is going to be really helpful, really getting in there to understand all the moving parts of a good transition can be very, very helpful. So you're going to ask yourself, did the reader use reflection, time markers, or shift in setting? Was the change gentle or abrupt? Really look at those transitions and identify what worked for you and why it didn't. Then take out that highlighter and mark those transition points. You may be looking at a place where the author is transitioning from childhood to adolescence, or from one setting to another, or from an event to a reflection. Mark those up and label them. Is it a chronological marker? Is it a reflective transition? Make sure that you're marking all of them. And then at the end, flip through your pages there and look at the variety. My guess is that the memoir that you are marking up probably has all kinds of different transitions. Rare is the story where the author relies on the same kind of transition from scene to scene to scene. And without that variety, you will start to notice those transitions. They'll start to stick out in a way that actually feels kind of bumpy. Instead, what we aim for is lots of different ways of transitioning into a new scene and using some of these different techniques we talked about and sprinkling them throughout your manuscript. So, highly recommend using mentor text not only to study transitions, but to study any kind of element that you are working on in your draft. If you'd like to learn more about mentor texts, I have an entire video about how to make the most of them, and I'll stick a link to that in the comments section as well. If you liked this video, I would be so grateful if you would hit like, and if you would like more videos just like this one, all about craft, publishing, editing. I drop a new video in YouTube every Tuesday, so please subscribe so we can keep in touch. And if you have questions or comments, please share them. I would love to hear from you. Thanks.